Welcome into another edition of the GigEm247 Sports Podcast. I am Andrew Hattersley. Thrilled to be with you guys here alongside Carter Karels. We got a lot to get to, some basketball to talk about, some baseball to talk about. Baseball season got underway this past weekend with a weekend sweep over Elon. A lot to take away from that. And Texas A&M basketball, a tough loss on Tuesday night against Mississippi State, but still in great shape to make it back to the NCAA tournament for the third straight year. Carter, good to be with you. How's everything been going?
Everything's great, man. Thanks for having me on. Excited to do a podcast. It's been a while for us.
It
So
has been a minute. We've both kind of been lining up the schedules, seeing how things can kind of work out. Thrilled to be on here and talk a little hoops because it's been a fun season. Tuesday night was not such a fun night, but we'll get to that. We're going to start over the weekend. Texas A&M named a 2 seed, and I think people are still kind of wrapping their head around this with like an early bracket reveal with a month to go of naming the top 16 teams. I feel like I talked to some people who were like, wait, they do that? They do a early bracket reveal? Yeah, they do that. Started in the last couple of years, but Texas A&M, a 2 seed right now, and five of the top six seeds in the tournament from the SEC just gives an idea into how difficult this conference is. I know you were covering Arkansas at the time and got to talk to Buzz Williams after the game. Your reaction when you saw that they were a 2 seed?
yeah, I mean it's just crazy because you've gotten so accustomed these last few years to them being on the bubble and fighting their way into the tournament and looking at bracketology so closely to see, okay, are they in? Are they out? Well, now you're still looking at bracketology closely, but now it's more, are they a 3 seed or are they a 2 seed? And so speaks to the job that they did, speaks to the schedule that they put together. I mean, through 26 games, they've only had one quad 3 game. It speaks to the masterful job they did putting together the schedule and then how they've kind of mowed through some teams. Obviously, last night didn't go according to plan, but for the season, 20-6, 14 quad 1 and quad 2 wins. This is the best team that Buzz Williams has had at Texas A&M, and it's going to be interesting to see how these next 5 games play out because yes, they lose last night. They still could get a 1 seed. They'd have to, really get it together here and play it at another level down the stretch. There's not a ton of margin for error either. I mean, they've created so much cushion for themselves that even if they lost these last 5 games, it's not like it's going to knock them out of a tournament. It's not like they're going to have a really bad seed if they lose 5 straight games. They've created enough cushion to where they're in really good shape regardless of what happens.
Yeah, I still feel like a lot to play for, obviously, when you talk about the 4 seed, getting a top 4 seed in the SEC tournament. Huge from the aspect that you get the double bye. They sit, I think, a half game ahead of Missouri right now and a game ahead of Tennessee, which makes Saturday's game between the Vols and the Aggies that much more important. And it's amazing when you look at the schedule, right? They've already played kind of a gauntlet of a schedule, and you look over the last 5 games, and they've still got Tennessee, they've got Vanderbilt, who's not an easy team. They're under 500 in conference play, but not an easy team to put away. Florida and Auburn still to come, and then you've obviously got LSU, who's in the midst of a really rough season. But not an easy end of the season. But you look at, and I think this is why it's so important where they said, is we talked about this the last couple of years, that when you're sitting as a 7 seed, an 8 seed, somewhere in that range, you're talking about probably a tough first round opponent and then having to play a team like Houston in the round of 32 instead of having to play them in the Sweet 16. And so, from that aspect, it still feels like an important kind of 2.5 weeks to make sure you don't slip and you kind of stay in the 2-3 range and set yourself up to not only win a first round game, which they've done already, but to try to get to the second weekend in advance.
Yeah, I mean it's been the thing they haven't done under Buzz Williams is get to that second weekend. You get yourself a 2 or 3 seed, then yeah, you're favored to essentially go to that second weekend. And I want to talk about that loss to Mississippi State because I think there really is 2 ways to look at it, and wherever you feel on the Buzz Williams experience kind of probably determines one of the two ways where you are. But, the one way to look at it is kind of the doom and gloom of like, well, I know it's one loss, but think about how they lost. And, with what's coming up next, if they're playing like that, yeah, they're going to lose 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5 in that, that home stretch. And then the other way to look at it is like, hey, this team maybe was due for a bad game. They'd won 7 out of 8. They'd won 5 in a row. Mississippi State is a team that pretty much every year gives A&M one of the better games. I mean, they are so attuned to A&M's weaknesses every year, and I think it speaks to the coaching job that Chris Jans does. And every year, that's 4 out of 5 of their last 5 games at Humphrey Coliseum. They've dropped 4 of them, and so it's not an easy place for them to play in any year. And this is a year where Mississippi State has probably their best team under Chris Jans. So yeah, they're not the 2 or 3 seed. They're not of the likes of Florida or Auburn, but any SEC road game against a ranked opponent, it's going to be hard for you to win that game. And everything had been going well for A&M for about a month. So yeah, maybe they were due for it. And then at the same time, if they win this weekend, pretty much all is forgiven. They're still in an amazing spot. They're still a 2 seed if they win Saturday. And so this win, while it wasn't pretty, it's pretty easy to overcome it if you just win this upcoming game. So there really are 2 ways to look at it. It's kind of like, hey, in the grand scheme of things, not a huge deal, but also could it be a sign of things to come? And so I tend to think that it's more of an anomaly because look at it, like 54 points season low for Texas A&M. 35.8% shooting from the floor for A&M, second lowest of the season. 19 turnovers, second highest turnover mark of the season. 20 was their highest, which actually was in a win over Ole Miss. And so, kind of an anomaly. A lot of things that went wrong. And if you watch that game, it did seem like everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. I mean, it was almost comical. The last 10 minutes, it just seemed like there was a steal on every single possession for them. And so it was a 44-40 game with about 9.5 minutes left. And then everything went wrong for A&M. Then Mississippi State started hitting threes, and that was kind of all she wrote. But for the first 30 minutes of the game, it was fairly close. And I'm not going to say that this is an indictment or a sign of things to come for A&M because time and again, they have responded. Only once this season have they lost back-to-back games in a row. And if you look at 3 of the 6 losses they've had, 3 of the previous 5 losses they've had, they were followed by 4+ winning streaks, right? Like they have lost games. Like you think of the UCF game, they lose that game, they win 5 in a row. They lose the game against Oregon. I think they won 9 in a row after that. They lose the game to Texas. They win 5 in a row after that. They dropped the back-to-back games to Bama and Kentucky. Well, that was when they didn't have Wade Taylor healthy. And so, time and again this season, they have responded when things have gone wrong. They still are a very good team when everyone's healthy. About half of their losses are when key players were out of that game. And so I'm not overly concerned, but, it is still Florida, Auburn, Tennessee coming up, and that's 3 of the top 6 teams in the country.
No doubt. It's a good test, and obvious. And I think the thing about Tennessee, and that's why I'm interested to see how Texas A&M kind of responds this upcoming weekend, is you're going to get a similar sort of fight that you had against Mississippi State. I think one of the things that makes Mississippi State tough to deal with is, and I was kind of talking with Jacob Bain, our Genes page writer before this game, is just like Texas A&M likes to kind of, get in a rock fight a little bit and kind of, muddy the game up in a way. That's exactly what Mississippi State likes to do as well. And that's a game that they're not afraid to play in. And you look against Tennessee, and that's exactly kind of what Tennessee does as well. And another opponent that A&M's had some ups and downs with over the course of their time with under Buzz Williams. So interested to see how they respond on Saturday. And what Buzz Williams like to say will be a similar test, right? It's going to be a similar test that they get this upcoming weekend. So interested to see how they respond. But with it 2.5 weeks to go in the season, I think the stress level is probably lower than it's been in years past under Buzz Williams, and now it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of handle these last 5 games and into the SEC tournament. We're going to switch gears after a quick break and talk a little Texas A&M baseball, who also opened their season this past weekend at Bluebell Park with a 3-game sweep over Elon. More to come right after a quick break. Welcome back into the GigEm247 Sports Podcast. I am Andrew Hattersley, joined by Carter Karels. Carter, a 3-game sweep over Elon that started with kind of a grinded out 4-2 victory. The Bats came alive, laid a bit of a pitcher's duel on a cold night on Friday night, and then the Bats really came alive over the last 2 days with 28 runs over the last 2 days, and it's both comfortable wins. And just what you were in attendance for a couple of those games around the basketball game as well. What'd you kind of take away? And you did some 5 takeaways. What'd you kind of take away from this opening weekend?
Yeah, I think a couple things. Number one, the anticipation is real for this team.
Mm-hmm.
Blown away by the opening weekend crowd. It was the largest in an opening weekend history for A&M, the 4th largest for a series ever. And it was an awesome atmosphere, a deserved atmosphere for the preseason number 1 team in the country. And but I also think that this team is a bit of a work in progress. You can see why they're the preseason number 1 team. It was a deserved ranking. And I think at the peak of their powers this season, they're going to show that, and they showed it in glimpses over the weekend. But a couple red flags, I guess. I mean, it's you want to hammer home the fact that it's the opening weekend. There's going to be rust. You can't take away too much. There's still some experimenting going on when it comes to position battles and how the bullpen is going to shake out. A couple guys were hurt, like Josh Stewart didn't pitch. Brad Rudis, it was the first time he faced live hitters coming off an injury to his shoulder. And so you can't take too much away, but at the same time, work in progress. The defense and the bullpen, those were kind of the 2 big concerns. Defense, they had 5 errors for the weekend. It kind of felt like 10. Like it just felt like so many things were going wrong, and they were coming from all different places. You had catcher's interference. You had fly balls that should have been caught that weren't, pop-ups that should have been caught that weren't, throwing error on a pickoff play or pitcher throwing it to trying to get a guy out and it not working. So it just sort of one of those deals where it wasn't like one guy making all the errors. I know Blake Benderup didn't have the best defensive weekend, but it was coming from a lot of other places too. And so that was a concern. And then, the bullpen as well. And the bullpen doesn't concern me as much because I think you have talent there. And I think that, with the starting pitching that you're going to have, this is my dad's work computer, so excuse me. The talent that you're going to have with your starting pitching, it's going to enable you to, be, if you're not as great out of the bullpen with your starting pitching and the offense that this team has, it may not be as big of a deal as in previous years when, you don't have as loaded of a offense as this is. And, Ryan Prager on the mound and Miles Patton as your Sunday starter. so I'm not as worried. I think Fresh Corn as a reliever has a ton of potential. I think Weston Moss. I think he'll probably start for some of the midweek games, but if he's your fourth starter or your longer reliever in the postseason, that's a pretty good weapon to have. Brad Rudis certainly brings a lot of experience. We've seen Caden Wilson deliver before. There are options there out of the bullpen. I just think for an opening weekend when you don't have everybody available, 14 runs were scored, 10 of them were against A&M's bullpen. So it wasn't the greatest showing, but also when you're up 11-1, you're not putting out your best arms too. So again, I'm not as concerned about the bullpen stuff. Is it going to be an amazing bullpen this year? I don't know, but I wouldn't take too much from that. It's the defense that kind of concerns me, where there were a lot of issues that came up that, if you're the number one team in the country, you shouldn't be having as many issues as that. So overall, what matters is they're 3-0. What matters is, they're still number one. So it's a long season. We'll see how they continue to grow, and really they can kind of afford to have these, low moments or this rust, because they're not playing anybody huge until later this month when they go to Houston. And so you got Cal Poly coming up next. You got New Mexico State, not world beaters. So you can knock off the rust and experiment with your bullpen and figure things out, I think, over these next couple of weeks.
Yeah, not really until the end of the month. Like you said, they've got Texas State as a midweek game next week as well. Kind of got a couple weeks now to kind of kick into gear. You mentioned guys kind of being out and guys missing guys. I think that did open the door for one exciting storyline from this past weekend. Obviously, with Caden Sorrell being out, Aggie fans got their first look at Terrence Keel, and he certainly impressed, going 4 for 8 with 3 RBIs, was named the SEC Freshman of the Week. About as good a debut as you could kind of ask for. And you can see he looks, I think the word that kind of came to mind for me watching him over the course of the weekend was comfortable. He doesn't look out of place. He looks really comfortable for his first collegiate action, and just really impressive overall. Just wondering what your thoughts were getting to watch him for a couple days.
Yeah, you nailed it. I think confidence for me, it was kind of the word. We talked to him after the game Sunday, I want to say, and just blown away. I'm like, this guy's a 18-year-old freshman. Like, he's more mature than I am. How is this?
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's not the best measure because I'm not all that mature. But again, I'm just like, this guy, how is he 18 years old? And you see it on the field, and with how he played, I mean, I think that they were going to get this guy in the lineup eventually and kind of work him in every now and then. But with what he showed that first weekend, SEC Freshman of the Week, could he play his way into a spot? Now, he's not going to surpass Caden Sorrell. Sorrell's one of the better players on the team, preseason second team All-SEC. And what he did offensively and defensively last year was crazy. I mean, the guy was making highlight catch after highlight catch in the outfield last season. So I don't think you cannot just say, yeah, he's replacing Caden Sorrell.
Yeah.
But, you could experiment elsewhere. Maybe you move him to left field. Maybe you move Gavin Cash to first base. Maybe you could work his way in for, if Hayden Schott's knee isn't feeling great one day, maybe you work him in at DH. I don't know. But I think the way that he is playing, we'll see if it continues. And as teams get more tape on him and can kind of learn his tendencies, maybe he hits a cold streak here soon. But if he keeps playing like this, it's going to be hard to just keep him off the field and say, see you next season. And so what a weapon to have. And it speaks to the depth that this team has and the exciting future this team has. You think about once the Gavin Grahovics and the Jay Slavulettes and the Ryan Pragers leave, what's going to be the future of this team? Well, you're seeing it with a guy like Terrence Keel, and it's encouraging to see.
No doubt. And I think the other encouraging part of it is it gives you the ability, right, to be patient with Caden Sorrell. Now, you want to be careful with hamstrings anyway, but you can afford to kind of sit there and say, okay, opening weekend against Delon and probably sit him anyway. This is a good opportunity to get Terrence Keel some game action and get him in the fold. And you can afford to kind of play things safe until some of those bigger games come, like we talked about later in the month, and make sure Caden Sorrell is fully healthy down the line. The other big storyline, I think, is this we mentioned the bullpen had a little bit of struggles. Starting rotation wise, not bad for the opening weekend. You look at Ryan Prager, obviously felt like he had to kind of grind it out that first start. Got out of some big jams, made some big pictures, but overall, kind of a very solid opening weekend for that group.
Yeah, I think Miles Patton was really the story because you knew what Ryan Prager could do, and he didn't show you anything Friday that he hadn't shown before. I mean, it was an excellent start, but it was your typical Ryan Prager start. Miles Patton, though, being a new kid from Long Beach State, being the Sunday starter, there was a contested competition for that final spot, really between him and Weston Moss. What was he going to show? And I thought he did great. I thought he fought through an adverse inning. I thought he, lasted a good amount of 5 innings. Was it 1 run he gave up, or he was either 1 run or scoreless?
I think so.
And so a solid start from him. I think Lampkin is kind of the guy you look at as like, could do a little bit better. As your Saturday starter, I think you set the bar so high with Ryan Prager that you're thinking, well, Saturday starter to not kind of live up to that, to be the next guy right after Ryan Prager, it kind of sets you up poorly. But I think that he did enough, obviously, to win the game. It wasn't horrible. I think he gave up 3 runs in 4 innings, so not his best, but not too bad.
Yeah, 5 innings, 1 run, and 8 strikeouts for Miles Patton on Sunday. So very good kind of first action for him as an Aggie. And as we said, plenty more to come for Texas A&M. They'll be back inside Bluebell Park this upcoming weekend against Cal Poly, and then a midweek game against Texas State. Hopefully the weather cooperates. Had to cancel the midweek game against McNeese State on Tuesday night, but that kind of opened the door for everybody to watch A&M basketball. So maybe it would have been better to have the McNeese State game. But certainly a lot of fun action to come at Bluebell Park. And thanks to everybody for joining us this afternoon on this edition of the podcast. We'll be back next week to kind of cover a little more about Texas A&M baseball as that Houston series kind of approaches at the end of the month. So again, thanks to everybody for joining, and we'll see you guys soon.